Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Despite efforts by Governor Brown and some backers of the millionaire tax to unite forces with one proposal, there's still a rival tax measure competing for the November ballot. Ross Mirkarimi's future as sheriff of San Francisco remains uncertain even after pleading guilty to a misdemeanor charge of false imprisonment in the criminal case of domestic violence. BART finds its way to San Jose with a $9 million boost of federal funding. Also, a rising star in politics, California Attorney General Kamala Harris on her efforts to bring relief to struggling homeowners and more. Coming up next. Good evening. I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel tonight are Gary Richards, San Jose Mercury News transportation reporter; Rachel Gordon, San Francisco Chronicle City Hall reporter; and joining us later, John Myers, our Sacramento bureau chief, will be with us to talk about Governor Brown. But Rachel, first we're going to start with you in a long-running story here in San Francisco, and that is about San Francisco's sheriff. Sheriff Mirkarimi seems to not have unwound himself from this case involving his wife and domestic violence. So
right. I mean, there always seems to be something new all the time. And this week we found out that Ross Mirkarimi, who was facing 3 criminal charges, all misdemeanors, stemming from a case of alleged domestic violence on New Year's Eve, that he decided instead in a plea bargain with prosecutors to plead guilty to a lesser charge of false imprisonment. He had been facing domestic violence, battery, dissuading a witness, and child endangerment because this alleged incident took place in front of their 2-year-old son. So they again decided that they were going to have a plea bargain agreement. He's going to be sentenced on Monday. And this case just keeps going and going and going. Jury selection had been underway already. They had close to 450 potential jurors in the pool, only about 150 left. A lot of people have heard about this case. And even after sentencing Monday, we aren't sure if that's the end of the story. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not the end of the story, because Mayor Ed Leek has to decide whether he wants to bring a charge of official misconduct against the sheriff. If he does that, that opens up a whole new political quagmire at City Hall, because the Board of Supervisors ultimately will be the ones that will decide whether Ross Mirkarimi should be removed from office. So it's a case that hasn't ended, and it seems to just keep building and building and building.
Do you think that people outside of San Francisco understand what is going on here? Is this partially political, the fact that it keeps moving from place to place, or is it the defendant himself that keeps getting in trouble?
We have to keep in mind that this is a top law enforcement official. The San Francisco Sheriff runs one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the state of California. Here's a top law enforcement official who has pleaded guilty to a crime of false imprisonment. It's the San Francisco Sheriff that runs the San Francisco jails. I mean, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. This case has made international headlines, not just national headlines, not just local ones. One of the reasons it's international headlines as well is that his wife, Eliana Lopez, has been a soap opera star in Venezuela before she came here to move to San Francisco. So there's been attention all around that aspect of it. Is it politically tinged? Well, he's an elected official, and he's being prosecuted by an elected official, and ultimately it's elected officials that might bring charges against him. But if you listen to District Attorney George Gascon, he's like, absolutely, this is not political. We are prosecuting this case by the book. I think where Mirkarimi might have one of his best cases that this is political is that there's been information that's been leaked out from the police department over the time. But I'd say whether you're a progressive, as Mirkarimi is, a moderate, conservative, San Francisco style, that this kind of information would have gotten out anyway. There are a lot of factions in the police department, and he's a high-profile city official, and there seems to be a lot of hunger around this. Is it beyond San Francisco? You go to the supermarket, the playgrounds, the schoolyards, you're on Muni, a lot of people are talking about this case.
And in that view from afar, from the South Bay, it's just embarrassing. It's like, what's going on up there? Is it just another San Francisco issue, but it goes beyond that?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, there have been a lot of things that have come out in pre-trial hearing. We had an ex-girlfriend talking about women's panties. So, of course, that's going to get a headline, you know, with the ex-girlfriend coming in. There's been a videotape that a neighbor has taken that was the key piece of evidence in the Mirkarimi case, which was really that the wife, Eliana Lopez, went to her to confide in her and what happened. So there's a videotape of the bruise that she allegedly got on her arm from her husband, as well as her tearfully recounting what happened. The defense teams, not only for Mirkarimi's defense team, plus the wife's lawyers, have tried every avenue they could to try to keep that out of evidence in the trial. So there have been a lot of motions before the courts, a lot of coverage of that. It's, you know, and Mirkarimi's legal bills keep climbing. He's already had two fundraisers that we know of to try to tamp down the legal bills.
But wasn't it a comment of his about his legal bills that got him in trouble with the DA?
That was one of the things. So another aspect this week is that after he entered his plea on Monday in Superior Court, he said, "I am guilty of this crime of false imprisonment of my wife." He then had comments that were both in the Mateer and Ross column in the Chronicle as well as the Bay Guardian, not direct comments from him, but from people around him saying, perhaps the main reason he pleaded guilty was because of the legal bills, because he wanted to end this issue that was kind of consuming his family. He wanted to put it behind him. So Gascon came out this week, told the Chronicle editorial board, you know, if he's guilty, then he should plead guilty. But if he doesn't really think he's guilty, he shouldn't plead guilty, and we should take this to trial and let a jury decide that. So on Monday at the sentencing hearing, the judge is likely to ask Mirkarimi, do you really feel you're guilty? And on a domestic violence charge, it's related to it. In fact, the punishment that he's facing right now is everything that a domestic violence offender would face. He's 3 years probation. He has to enter domestic violence intervention classes every week for a year. He had to apologize to the neighbor who shot the videotape because before they were maligning her, the defense team. He has court fees and fines. So there's a lot that he might even have to take parenting classes and do 100 hours of community service.
Let's talk about the mayor's role here. What are his choices? One of his choices was to just, if people didn't like it, to have him recall.
Right. So a recall effort can start against a public official 6 months after they've taken office. He took office on January 8th, so by July 8th is when they can start this petition drive. You have to collect about 47,000 signatures from registered voters in San Francisco. Not the easiest thing to do, but it's possible to do. It's possible if those signatures are collected, it could be in the November election, or if they can't meet the deadlines, it could be at a later date in a special election. Misconduct is not the easiest thing to do, and it's been tried very infrequently in San Francisco. In the 1930s, there was a public defender who was removed from office, and he was involved in a murder-for-hire scheme. When George Moscone was mayor, which is quite a long time ago, he removed an airports commissioner, and a higher court overturned the misconduct charge on that. That's the only other time. There's a San Francisco supervisor more recently, Ed Jew, who got in trouble for shaking down some members of the public. He was facing the misconduct charge, but he resigned before it ever got progressed very far. That's it in San Francisco history. There's a lot of lawyering going on now. What constitutes misconduct? Is it something that can be upheld? The mayor's saying he's giving it very close consideration, working with the city attorney. He's also talking to former mayors to see what the political implications might be. How do you handle it politically?
Do you think there's any chance he could resign?
No, correct.
Right. I mean, that's a good question. So there's been a strong demand that he resign from advocates for domestic violence victims. They've been in City Hall and talking to the mayor and supervisors saying, look, he shouldn't be in this office in this position. He's been steadfast, though. I'm not resigning. I'm planning to mend my family and do the job I was elected to do.
Gary, you're reporting on a story that's long-term, much longer term than this story. That's only been in the news for a few weeks. You're talking about something that's been talked about for maybe the last half century?
50, 60 years. It was in the 50s when they were conceiving the BART district, and at the time San Mateo County was going to be originally a part of it, and the idea would be if San Mateo County got into it, it would come to Santa Clara down the peninsula. Well, when San Mateo County opted out, partly because they feared that the Serramonte Shopping Center would lose customers because people would take BART instead of 280, which hadn't been built yet. And so San Mateo opted out. Santa Clara County didn't have a chance. But over the 20 plus years I've been doing this transportation stuff, that's been the number one question. When's BART coming to San Jose? Well, it's coming down the East Bay. A lot's happened in those 50, 60 years, and Silicon Valley happened. It wasn't a farming community anymore, and a lot of people who work in the valley live in the East Bay, Contra Costa County, Alameda County, and as far east as the Stockton area. And so the county voters have twice passed taxes to get it, and just this past week the federal government signed off on a $900 million federal full funding agreement that will come over the next several years, and construction starts this summer.
Was that just a $900 million lying around someplace waiting on what?
Well, it's part of their, but they have a pot of money. I want to say it's more than a couple billion every year for new starts projects, new rail projects, and it'll come in like $100 million increments. And once the FTA was convinced that not only could they build it, but they could operate the trains, it got a recommended rating. When they just had money to build it, it was on their not recommended list. So they came back, they shortened the line, the initial phase of it, and they got a tax by passed the 2/3 majority by just a couple thousand votes back in last November, and the Fed said, okay, you're in.
So Gary, it goes not all into the heart of downtown San Jose at this point, right? But that's still a possibility that will do that.
It will go to East San Jose, right near the Berryessa Avenue Highway 101 interchange, and that's about 6 miles short of where it wants to eventually go to tunnel downtown. That's a $4 billion, the second part, and they have about $2 billion of that. And so they're looking for money, but it's going to be tougher to come by because the state commit money to high-speed rail versus BART.
So just with it stopping there near Berryessa, is it going to become a train to nowhere? I mean, what happens once you get off the train?
They're going to have express buses running from there to downtown. And the federal government actually has a loan program where if they can be convinced that you've got money to eventually build it, they can loan you the money. Los Angeles is doing that for a 30-year transportation program. And one thought being now, this current tax to build BART will expire in 2036. That seems really far out there, but if they renew that tax, pass a ballot measure now to renew that tax, then go back to Fed, say, we've got money coming down the line. Can we bond out? Can we move this forward? And there's some optimism there.
Is there any talk at all of actually having it kind of ring the Bay, that it eventually could come up the peninsula to San Mateo and San Francisco, or is that just don't get ahead of ourselves?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the line will run to Santa Clara, and it will meet with the Caltrain station in Santa Clara. So that's right up the peninsula. But when high-speed rail comes in, if it comes in on the peninsula, that's where that's going to run. So it's, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think it's just too costly.
Just finally, does it go past the new stadium? Is it any place connected?
If it goes downtown, it will be within a walking distance of the stadium.
Well, thank you so much, Gary. Let's turn now to John Myers, who's in Sacramento, about Governor Brown's surprise everyone with his decision to join forces with backers of a rival tax measure. Please explain to us what happened.
Well, what happened, Belva, of course, is in the world of politics, we think we know everything before it happens, right? And we didn't know this one. So, this week we found out that Governor Brown no longer has two separate rivals of tax measures for the November ballot. Now, instead of 3 measures, there are ostensibly 2. The governor joined forces with the California Federation of Teachers, which had been pushing a millionaire's tax for the November ballot. Instead, the Federation of Teachers has decided to back off of that plan, and they're going to join the governor. So what they've come up with is really what I would call the Jerry Brown Plus plan, which means it's the Brown plan plus a few other things. The sales tax is slightly smaller in this. It's a 0.25% increase in the sales tax, and the income tax actually is a little higher on millionaires than the governor had originally wanted. The entire tax package would now last about 7 years before the whole thing would roll off, so 2018 when the taxes would expire. It would bring in somewhere between $7 and $9 billion, depending on whose numbers you believe. And the governor got a lot of great news just today, here on Friday. Not only did he have the fiscal analysis done on the measure, but the Attorney General, late this evening, issued a title and summary, which means the governor can now circulate the initiative for signatures. He got all of that done in 48 hours. And I think now the governor has probably 5, maybe even 6 weeks to get the signatures he needs. It's going to be very expensive to do it that fast, but he's got a pretty good shot. And then, of course, there's a campaign.
Well, we cannot say that this is not a governor who's flexible.
Exactly. And you know, Jerry Brown is well known for this, as he likes to always talk about it, the canoe theory of politics, right? You paddle a little on the left, you paddle a little bit on the right, you go down the center. It kind of reflects, I think, Jerry Brown's pragmatism sometimes toward what you've got to do to get the job done. And I think the governor clearly saw here that he needed to join forces, that multiple measures were not going to be good for his. And in the group of the California Federation of Teachers, I mean, they had the millionaire's tax. It was the one that was polling the best of all of them. But honestly, there was a lot of political pressure brought to bear on them over the last few weeks. I kind of joked earlier today that I think they were threatened with being in political Siberia in California if they had continued to oppose the governor and put a measure up that might have killed his. So they joined forces. They think they've got a better chance together than apart. But we should mention here that the business community hasn't weighed in yet on this new measure. They're not going to like the higher end taxes. They're not going to like how long the taxes last. And the real question is, will there be a funded opposition campaign to this? And if it is, the governor will have a real fight on his hands.
So, John, we're going to hear, I'm guessing, from the governor and other proponents of the tax that these are the consequences, right? If you don't pass this tax, it's going to be many more state parks that are going to close, many more classrooms that are going to have 60 students instead of 30 students. I mean, is that kind of the bottom line of what we can expect between now and November?
Well, I think in some way, Rachel, because I mean, keep in mind that these tax revenues, and we're talking about a November election, you're right, but these tax revenues are going to be written into the budget that probably will be agreed to by late June, early July. And so if you're going to account on revenues that the voters haven't actually yet approved, then there is going to be some kind of trigger mechanism that's going to say if those revenues aren't approved by the voters, then we cut X, we cut Y, we cut Z. I think that trigger list is still in debate here in Sacramento. There are a lot of Democrats that don't like the list that the governor's put out so far, but you're right, it is largely education, and I think that's going to promote a very vigorous debate about whether we have to do all those cuts if the taxes don't happen, and if those are the right cuts versus, say, something else. So remains to be seen.
Quickly, John, there is still an opposing measure that could be on the ballot, right?
There's a competing measure, maybe more than an opposing measure, absolutely.
Sorry.
It's a measure by a wealthy civil rights attorney named Molly Munger, independently wealthy, so she can get it on the ballot all by herself. It would raise income taxes on almost all California taxpayers with the money earmarked for K through 12 schools. However, that broad of an income tax increase is not polling very well. I think the governor's people think they can win if that one's on the ballot. They didn't think they could win if there were 3. And so I think if you're Jerry Brown, it's been a pretty good week.
It's been a pretty good week. So now all we have to do is get those signatures. Thank you so much, John, for the update on that changing story.
You're welcome.
Well, this is Women's History Month, and tonight we talk with a woman who made history when she was elected as California's first female Attorney General. Kamala Harris's political star has steadily been on the rise. Her recent rousing speech at the California Democratic Convention wowed the crowd.
And California Democrats, when we pull together, we are too big to fail.
As Attorney General, she's earned a reputation as a tough negotiator, securing up to $18 billion in aid for struggling California homeowners in the national mortgage settlement.
We were very determined to make sure that California, the hardest hit in the country, would receive its fair share.
Also on Harris's agenda this year, a homeowner's Bill of Rights and a crackdown on mobile phone apps that collect users' data. Newsweek recently named her one of 150 women who shake the world and invited her to their international conference on women in New York. Earlier today, we talked about her job as Attorney General and the role of women as leaders. Attorney General Harris, it is really good of you to join us here. And today you're in the news again. You're in the news because today you appointed a monitor to oversee that $18 billion settlement that you were able to push through on behalf of California homeowners. Now tell us a bit about UC Irvine Professor Catherine Porter. How does she specially qualify to make sure that people really benefit from this?
Can I first start by saying, Belva, it's so wonderful to be on your show. And thank you for everything that you do and have always done for the Bay Area, the state, and this country. You are such an inspiration to me. And I know you're going to be going off the air soon, so I just had to get that in.
Okay.
But Catherine Porter, so we negotiated a settlement to bring back to California $18 billion to California homeowners who have been in this awful process of foreclosure. And the idea is that that money will be used for principal reduction and also to allow people to refinance their loans so they can afford to stay in their homes. We negotiated for California in terms of the dollar amount and then some certain specific provisions, which we have referred to in total as the California commitment. As part of the national settlement, a monitor has been chosen for the country. I decided that in addition to Joe Smith, who was chosen as a monitor for the country, I wanted someone who was focused specifically on California, because of course we are the largest state, we were hardest hit. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, promises made are promises kept.
There's a homeowner's bill of rights. You're trying to get
Yes.
that through the legislature.
Thank you.
What are its chances?
So homeowners' bill of rights, again, settlement only covers 3 years, and we need permanent reform in California, and we need the rules to be changed. And in particular, for all those folks who are in the process of dual track, going through foreclosure, but they're also trying to modify the loan and stay in the home. They're in two systems that aren't talking to each other. One simple fix is let's have one point of contact for that homeowner. That's one of the bills. The bills are about saying that we want to make sure that there are appropriate penalties for misconduct. And we have the package with the support of the Speaker, Perez, and Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, and we are counting on their leadership along with folks like Nancy Skinner and Lonnie Hancock and Mark Leno and others who have stepped up to provide leadership to say, you know, enough is enough and we've got to stand up. The banks may be powerful interests. It can be very difficult for some legislators to stand up to them, but I think we have courageous leadership in California that is prepared to do that in the best interest of the consumer and the homeowner.
Let's move to the criminal justice system, because
Yes.
that's where you made your reputation. There's going to be a question before voters on the death penalty. That was a difficult issue for you when you were running for office. Where do you stand now on the issue? Of the death penalty?
My position is the same. I am personally opposed to the death penalty, but I will follow the law. And so we'll see how that initiative turns out.
And another issue that you wrote a book and included something about 3 strikes, the 3 strikes law. It also will be on the ballot again.
Right.
What are your feelings about taking another look at 3 strikes?
I think that we need to have laws that are primarily concerned with keeping the community safe, and that was the intent of the 3 strikes legislation. But for example, when I was district attorney of San Francisco, my policy was that we would not pursue a 3rd strike unless that, which is a 25-year to life sentence, unless that offense was of a serious or violent nature. And I believe that's the right way to approach it.
The whole issue of President Obama's push on his health care bill, which will be heard by the Supreme Court.
That's right.
You are for the expansion
Absolutely.
of Medicaid. What do you think the chances are that this bill has for staying alive going through the courts?
I think the Affordable Care Act was the right thing to do. We needed reform of our health system in this country when being a woman is a pre-existing condition, which means that it can be the basis for being denied medical coverage, such as if you're pregnant and you're trying to improve your insurance to get prenatal care, and you could be denied. This is true story because you're pregnant at the time that you apply for the improved insurance policy. I think that it's outrageous. So Affordable Care Act was the right thing to do. It's being challenged, and we as California filed many briefs before many courts throughout the country supporting it. It's called an amicus brief, and the Supreme Court will be hearing it. I believe that the court will do the right thing. It'll probably be a 5-4 vote, but I believe that the court will find, as we have found in our legal research, that the Affordable Care Act is constitutional and should be supported. And
I'm going to try to squeeze in
Yes.
one last question
Yes.
on women leadership. You were just at this big conference.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton is saying to women, get out and do something.
That's right.
Do you think this is really a year when women are going to make an impact on the national scene politically?
I think women
electorally?
make an impact every day of the week of the year. And sometimes other people are just a little slow to recognize that. But I think that there has been a legitimate concern about, what's going on. We fought these fights. The fight was fought 50 years ago, and we're still having a conversation about contraception. Mm-hmm. That's scary. And, I remember a saying, Coretta Scott King. Not specific, I don't have it down, but she said, the fight for civil rights is something that must be fought with each generation. And I think she had a reason for saying that, which includes the fact that when you're fighting for people's rights, it's not always going to be permanent. It's not permanent of a permanent nature. And so we're going to have to keep fighting. And so let's not get tired or fatigued, because that's just the nature of it. And so that's where we are. We have to keep fighting for women's reproductive health rights. And it's unfortunate, but we'll take it on and we'll win, as we've done in the past.
Looking at your portfolio, it doesn't seem as though you ever get tired. There's so much more to talk to you about, but I'm happy to have had an opportunity.
Thank you. And
thank you
Belva,
so
thank
much.
you for your leadership, really.
Thank you. Well, that's all for tonight, and I want to thank you again for joining us here for this program. Please visit kqed.org/thisweek for past episodes and segments, to subscribe to our newsletter and podcast, and to share your thoughts about the program. I'm Belva Davis. Thank you for watching. Good night.